there are. She's a symbol, I think, of the power of literature. You know? With an abused expression, I would say that literature, like the little bit diplomacy, that with less emotions can build bridges. She would say can cross lakes, and, and the authors have the extraordinary power of being acting as, she says, interpreters of maladies. And I think two things come to my mind. Two themes. One is the theme of the stranger. Here we see a neon installation that is not a line of Clairefontaine, strangers everywhere. We are strangers even to ourselves. And the second is the incredible linguistic pilgrimage to Italy and across Italy that makes Jhumpa even dearer to us. And is an admirable path because it requires, as she explains, and we will see a lot of tenacity, determination. She feels like a soldier in the desert, but at the same time, is the imperfection that makes you alive. And so you are lonely, you must be brave, but you feel alive, which is not marginal. We need a lot to spread Italian here because it's, of course, is a natural channel of understanding and communication between us, and we hope that we can help us in giving us suggestions and ways to do that, and by sharing your incredible story. Thank you for coming, and we are listening to you.
Namaskar, good evening, buonasera, benvenuti. It's a special pleasure, it's an honor to have this beloved guest with us at the beginning of a new year and at the end of a year that the Italian Cultural Center has devoted to an understanding of foreign food, not belonging, importance. So we are delighted to have one of the most powerful voices, I would say poetical, maybe powerful, it's not for the assonance of the word power, appropriate, the most intense poetical voice. And she doesn't need introduction. I just want to name 2 or 3 important words, and also at the end of your awards list, the fact that she's been nominated Cavaliere della Repubblica Italiana of the Italian Republic by our beloved President Mattarella. She received the OME Award for short stories, the Hemingway Prize twice, the Pen Prize on Hemingway and Award. Of course, we know she got the Pulitzer Prize. She got the New Yorker's Best Review, the Franco Corner International, the Guggenheim Fellowship, and the Antonio Enrico from Guerzoni. But apart from that, for us, she's a wonderful friend. Italian is not English, it's not French. For an Italian traveling around the world, meeting someone who speaks Italian carries a sense of marvel. And marvel has been accompanying us in these 2 days in which walking in the street of Delhi, we were speaking in Italian with a beautiful sense of displacement and friendly, colorful sounds. Together with us tonight, we have also Gioia Guerzoni. I've been knowing Gioia for many years, and we both had less white hair, although much less on her. She translates maybe from English into Italian. She's been translating for small and big publishing house in Italy. She was also responsible for editing 40 young Indian writers in the anthology, including Sarnag Banerjee and Zaidi after 21. She works also as a consultant for publishing houses in Italy. So, benvenuta. I would say before say benvenuta Jhumpa, I say benvenuta Nilanjana Sudeshna. So, how Jhumpa comes in the life of Nilanjana Sudeshna.
Buonasera a tutte e tutti. Namaskar. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really honored to be welcomed by the Italian ambassador, everyone in the embassy, the Cultural Institute, everyone involved in organizing this beautiful evening in Delhi. I'm so happy to be with my dear friend, Gioia Guerzoni. We've been dreaming about this day for a long time, and talking and hoping it will work and the dates will work, and it's worked, and I'm just so pleased to be here. And thank you, Andrea, truly for everything, for being such a gracious host. So you're asking how Jhumpa entered into Nilanjana Sudeshna. Well, so this is a story that sort of inspired the namesake, my first novel, my second book. So many of you may be familiar with this tradition, at least in Bengali families, but I think in many families, in many cultures actually, not just in India, of having an official name for documentation, for public life and identity, and also what's called a daknam in Bengali, the name you're called, literally. The pet name would be a way to describe it in English. And that name was Jhumpa, but in fact, my mother, when I was born, put that name also on my birth certificate. So it was registered from the very beginning as one of my 3 names. And then when I went to school, I think they wanted to make me an official person in the world. So they registered me under Nilanjana, but then I wasn't responding to that name because, of course, no one had ever called me that before, and nobody explained to me what was going to happen. And so for whatever reason, the teachers said, well, Jhumpa's shorter, so we'll just go with that one. And it became my name. It became my public name and my private name. Terribly mispronounced all my life in the United States. And then I became a writer, and it became an even more public name, which really strikes me sometimes as the ultimate irony, right? in any case, that experience of growing up with two names and the strangeness of, I mean, it's such a beautiful metaphor actually for what it means to have a hybrid identity, right? And yet it was something very confusing and messy to explain, to inhabit growing up, at least growing up in the United States. But that's how she came about.
Thank you. Well, that makes me going straight to the next questions, which is also somehow informed by what we have been talking in these 2 days, working together, is which is essential questions in the contemporary world, is this sense of not fully belonging. That is a feeling that is carried by people who are migrating, but also people who are within the family, not fitting into the family, or not fitting into what nature has given you as a body or a sexual identity. And we know that in the world we live in, there are endless depth and layers of possibility of not belonging. So, what in this not belonging process, a language, what is the role of a language that a language plays, and how, if you can describe the journey of moving from a language that you've been absorbing simultaneously from your mother, Bengali, and English at school while growing in the States, and how the decision of learning another language, not learning simply learning language, but inhabiting language until that point of being able to write and to dream, to breathe in another language.
This is such a rich question. We could spend time on this one for the rest of the hour, but I'll try to synthesize. I mean, I think most of us would agree that at the end of the day, language is the deepest strain of identity that we often will hold on to. And certainly, I saw the Bengali language, which was the language of my parents, the insistence on holding on to that was so important, given that I was being raised, they were raising me and my sister very far away from Kolkata and the Bengali language that would have been surrounding us in our day-to-day lives, but was not. So they did everything they could with their passing down the language in our day-to-day conversations, the social life they cultivated, the people who came to our home, the homes we visited. All of this made it clear to me that it was essential for them to hold on to their identity and try to pass that identity down to us by means of this language, this very specific language. The problem enters in when there is a space between you yourself and the language that is supposed to, in some sense, fully represent who you are, to sort of substitute for, stand in for your identity. So to move forward in time, to my life in Italy. The fact that I was so, I don't want to say cavalier, but I was very ready and easy with the idea of setting aside the English language. And a lot of people found this really puzzling because they said, well, you're a writer, and why would you want to do that? Italian isn't really your language, so why are you just reading the Italian newspapers now? And why are you, sort of diminishing the role of English in your life? To me, this was like the most exciting thing that I could possibly do with my life, right? Is to completely immerse myself in a new language, in my case, in the Italian language. But these questions, I think, came from a sense of, aren't you not being true to yourself, to your true core identity? And this question of one's selfhood, one's identity as being somehow fixed, rooted, tied inextricably forever to a language, to this notion of the mother tongue, right? Which I would argue is a type of myth, right? It's a myth making, and it has created. It grows out of German Romanticism. It comes out of an idea of building the nation state and making a language synonymous with one's identity, one's placement, one's geographical coordinates. All of this has to be somehow aligned, right, for the system, for the ecosystem to work, with the mother tongue at the center as the axis of all of this. So the interesting problem arises when you don't feel this completely coordinated system, right? That you don't feel a part of it. When there is as we would say in Italian, uno scarto, right? There's this gap, a space that's not. There is some kind of space to negotiate between you and that language. So I felt that immediately with the first language I spoke, with Bengali. I felt it with the second language I learned and spoke, which was English. And of course I felt it with all of the languages I went on to study before Italian, aware that these were new languages, that I needed dictionaries to navigate them, to learn them. I needed to take tests, I needed to practice, I needed to make flashcards, this whole process. But it was a process that I've loved from the very beginning of my life. And why? Because I think I've always, every language I've ever known or had a relationship has been a foreign language to me. I've always felt the stranger, right, who is entering into that language. And so this is the starting point. And I think many people have asked me why Italian, and the obvious short answer is it was a source of liberation. But the liberation, what it liberated me from, was this question of belonging as an end point, as a goal, as something that I needed to do in order to feel fully valid as a human being. And once I realized this was no longer needed, this was the liberation, that I could consider myself a valid human being with various degrees of ability in languages, and that I could move among them and through them, and sometimes the gravitational center, the baricentro, is more leaning toward one, more leaning toward the other, and that this was also okay, So this is just the building, the starting, the starter to this very long question that we could really unpack for a long time. But I just wanted to explain a little bit of sort of what's really behind the Italian project.
Listening to you, what really comes clear and new and fresh is the word not belonging is colored with a lot of negative implication. It seems that this not belonging in your life has triggered an incredibly vital process of being attentive, being curious, and being also constantly in search. I remember when I read In Other Words, In Altre Parole, I found many beautiful things that I could feel they were true to me, despite of being Italian and knowing that language. But through what you say as a non-Italian native speaker, I could find myself and in many different moments of my life when language really challenges the idea of identity. So I thought that even in these 2 days when we engaged in conversation while walking, that this positive, beautiful, vital, not knowing process of not belonging can be redefined, invented every time. Because at the core of it, there is a vulnerability that allows life to take form. Would you say that?
I would say that very much, and I think that, you know, we know that ignorance is such a generative thing in a way, right? It can be. I mean, there's ignorance that is ignorance that causes damage, causes terrible damage in the world. But then there's the ignorance that wants to evolve. So acknowledging that we don't know everything. We don't know everything perfectly. We don't remember all the facts. We don't always remember how to say something in a certain language. The fact that that we can be vulnerable, exactly, and feel exposed. I mean, I think that, you know, while you were asking the question or posing the question, I thought of, for some reason, I started thinking about De Chirico and his brother Alberto Savigno. You know, these are brothers. So speaking of Giorgio De Chirico, the famous artist, painter, poet also, and his brother Alberto Savigno, equally brilliant writer, painter. They're stateless, you know, they're born in Greece, they go to France, they are Italian by heritage, but this journey, right, this journey for both of the brothers generated so much. It was so fertile for each of them, this place of not belonging. And when you look at a De Chirico painting, which I hope something comes to mind, and if not, go and look at his work, to realize, to sort of understand this question of alienation, placelessness, right? De Chirico painted these empty spaces that were, you know, are they places of belonging or not belonging? Kind of both, right? You know, as a viewer, you're very much inside of the place, but you're also very much outside of the place. And, you know, so I'm thinking about figures like them. I'm thinking about so many of the writers, the Italian writers, particularly of the 20th century, who have inspired my journey into Italian, who have taught me, who have been my teachers, you know, people like Pavese, people like Moravia, people like Fenoglio, so many people, you know, writers like Fabrizia Ramondino, who's growing up in Spain, who's hearing the Andalusian lullabies being sung to her, and feeling the deep connection to those words, and not to Italian, and then to live in Germany, and also to know French, and then to come to Italy, you know, and then to write in Italian. This is Italian literature. Italian literature from Dante to today has always been this process of, you know, grown out of, so much of it has grown out of questions of not belonging, and not belonging fully to language, and going out of, you know, the entire construction of the Italian language, we can say, we know, comes from different traditions from Provençal, Arabic strains. These culminate in Dante's language, which now we look to as, the source of Italian. But it's never the source, because we'll talk eventually. I know with Gioia we'll talk about my now 5 years old project with Ovid, but I'll just give a sneak preview of the Latin poet Ovid, whose masterpiece, The Metamorphoses, I've been translating with a colleague. But one of the things about that poem that is so powerful is this question of where is the source, where is the beginning, what is the origin? And if you read the Metamorphoses, and it's not the only literary work where you will find this, but I think it's one of the key literary works where you will find this really emphasized, is the fact that even in the beginning, there was already something before that. So it's a slippery notion of origins, we must hold on to the fact that we can always go back to what there was before and before that. And so it's a sort of sliding mirror doors, I guess, but also in this backward sense, which makes the whole discourse of origins, identity, mother tongue, nation, identity, belonging, all of this suddenly starts to really, really tremble and collapse, But we see this from, certainly in Latin poetry, but in many other traditions. I just speak of Ovid because I've been living inside of Ovid. I mean, literally, if you ask me where's my home been for the past 5 years, in addition to New York and Rome, I would say 8th century ancient Rome, and specifically the hexameter of Ovid.
That reminds me that Ovid died in exile.
He did.
That for me was a very bitter place to end his life. We might go back to that later. I think it's the moment to understand also, since you are a writer but also a translator, and you've been translating yourself from Italian to English, and you've been also writing a beautiful anthology of Italian writers. Few of them you mentioned, Fenolio, Pavese, Calvino. I know that Manganelli also plays an important role in your Italian formative process. These are all writers who are being translated. They know very well English literature, and they brought English literature to a broader Italian audience. So it's interesting and beautiful at the same time to see that we need translators, that we can engage in a process of learning another language, which is a fantastic journey, especially if it triggers that dimension of wanting to know the other, to get closer to the other. But we also know, and we see also, that the last 2 Booker Prizes have been given to writers who write that they don't write in English, and the prize is being given to both writers and translators. So this is a question for you, Gioia. You were spending 30 years of your life translating. While visiting the exhibition Shared Stories, we touch these issues of your religion, and how it's important to read art history. For quite a long time, from a Eurocentric perspective, there was a model that got immediately. And now we see that it's not that there were parallel stories that informed each other. And while walking through the exhibition, seeing the birds, seeing the lions, we somehow for assonance got to see the role of translation in a much more subtle way. So I would like to ask you, Gioia, what is your journey in translation, which carries with it also the possibility of developing friendships with authors, like in this case.
That's an enormous question again, but and that exhibition, Share Stories, was really rich because it really made me think about our journeys of translators and writers in dealing with language, and I know that for myself, when you mentioned the mother tongue, like I knew when I was very little that I was not really interested in mother tongue, I was interested in other tongues. The family was not very interesting to me, the whole burden of the tradition of the so that's when I came to India. I was 18 for the first time. I spent almost 8 years of my life spending winters here. I never lived here long term. I only spent 4 or 5 months. And I was much more interested in not knowing languages. I remember the first time I sat in Bombay near Polander, and I could hear Urdu, I vaguely knew the word, just so different languages, but I was so much more fascinated than my own. And then gradually, I studied translation, and I knew I wanted to travel more than translating, but then it kind of combined. And then basically we're the masters of non-belonging because you're always in someone else's voice. You have to recreate a voice. And the beauty of it is that it's not that we're self-effacing our identity, but we're just, mixing it with ours. So it's something I still adore my job. I like it. I like it even more now because I think I can do it more freely. I can choose. I've been translating, apart from many Indian writers, I've been translating last year's Booker Prize, Orbital, and it's for me it's like to have a home. It's translation is not even the language. The translation itself is my bubble, and it's my home because it gives me the freedom to play with the words without having to think about the structure of the novel. So when translators, like colleagues, say that they want to be treated as the author, I always, because I know I became friends with many amazing writers, including Jhumpa and many others, I would say we are the authors of our translation. So I think it's as beautiful, but it has different elements and different challenges and different problems. But there's a lot of creativity involved in it as well as writing. But we are authors of our translations, and Jhumpa. I was thinking about. I've been living in the head of contemporary writers. I only translated big names like Iris Margot, Saki, and Gwendolyn Brooks, who was an amazing poet, Pulitzer Prize, Black Prize for Poetry. And then the others are really contemporary writers, so from Teju Pollens, Newsfed, and living in their head is like a very domestic connotation. It's really like living together with someone else, you know. It is like you were talking about Ovid. And so my question, thinking about my 30 years of living in the heads of contemporary writers, is about especially Ovid, because also she spent some time in my place in Greece working on Ovid, and how it is, because she also worked on Sternone, which is a currently contemporary writer, so I can tell, I know about my experience of, being always in the head of contemporary writers, which is very different from being in the head of Iris Murdoch, for instance, because you can't email her with queries, or like you have to take incredibly hard decisions because you're alone. But although I know that you were working with someone else, it would be interesting to know how your life was changed for so many years. You stayed with Ovid for so many years and lived with him, so that's interesting.
If I may say so, today this statement came out from you. The point is not being identical, but being similar.
Salvo.
Salvo is an Italian artist, and it's a beautiful statement because translation has to do, but not just translation, probably our life, because since we are born, we are in relationship with the other. Is a search for assonance and for similar, or let's say finding what the other evolved that can serve as a model for me. Well, would you define translation as a process of being similar and looking for the perfect translation, since you've been working for so many years on it, and what it means to work on translating a text that has been written centuries ago, so there's no chance of even reconstructing, I'm not saying to be in the author's mind, even reconstructing the cultural, social dimension the writer was giving me.
Again, such a rich question. So yeah, we're speaking about this very interesting Italian artist named Salvo from Sicily. I was ignorant of his work. These are the good things about being ignorant. Like, you can discover things, right? So the generative ignorance I'm talking about is the fact that none of us know everything, right? None of us have been everywhere. So this was this lovely moment of, I was in Torino, I was in Turin, there was an exhibit, and I said, who is Salvo? I've never heard of him. And it was such a beautiful discovery. Anyway, I was in this exhibit, and among the things I saw, he had worked with basically slabs of marble, which, if you go to Italy, everywhere from antique times to today, you'll see inscriptions. Often they're used to mark a life, the dates, the birth and death dates, as a kind of memorial stone, a lapide, it's called. So he worked with this material, and he wrote things on them that were kind of interesting, epigrammatic, And one of them said, simile non identico in Italian, similar, not identical. And I was actually there with another wonderful translator, a friend of mine, Fabio Pedone, And we were both just trembling. It was like we were at the temple and the goddess was shaking her rattles and we were just trembling with, we thought, oh my God, everything. Yeah, we were, and I was texting Joy at the same time saying, Guarda, look, we found like the oracle is speaking. It was like finding the oracle. That's what it felt like. We were like in Delphi and we were hearing, simile non identico. And we were just like, Fabio and I were just like, oh my God. Anyway, this is so fundamental to so many things. Needless to say, it's fundamental to understanding what translation is. Because the problem with, the issue with translation, the fact that readers are still very, everyone becomes very diffident and suspicious around, oh, but it's translated, oh, but what is that about? That's about this very sticky word called authenticity, which I would like to banish from every dictionary in every language, because it's caused a lot of problems in the world. If we could just get rid of that word, we could recalibrate a lot of very fundamental conversations and dialogues that we still need to have as human beings, right? But this authenticity word, as soon as it's like a roadblock, and it stops everything. So someone will say, oh, but you didn't really write that book, you wrote it in Italian. And come rispondere, right? Like, how do I respond to that? I say, first of all, there's a translation, which is similar, though not identical. And that's also, as Gioia was saying, a beautifully authored work in its own right. Written, rewritten, right? That's what a translation is. It's a rewriting of a book that is similar but not identical. So this is key to understanding translation, which is, to go back to the beautiful exhibit, Shared Stories, the first thing I thought when I was walking through the exhibit yesterday was, this is translation. This is translation. This is this slippery sense of, this beautifully slippery sense of origin. Like, where do these intertwined birds, are they Persian? Are they Chinese? Are they Indian? Are they, what with all of these parallel stories, as you were saying. So that's one thing. Then today we were at Qutub Minar, and we were pausing for a moment, and I saw the red sandstone column, and beside it the white marble column, and they were each carved, and they were each in this, very harmonious, similar proportions. They were similar, they weren't identical. And this was really resonant for me, to see it in architecture, right? To see how this notion could play out in architecture of such magnificence. So I think this is really a key. Salvo is our salvezza, right? He's going to save us. I think this notion, because I think it can really reverse a lot of damage that is being done by the focus, by this insistence on the cult of authenticity, which is a cult of authenticity, and this notion of everything streaming down purely from the font of the mother tongue and identity, and everything being, this idea of purity, as we know from Primo Levi, who survived fascism. Not only fascism, he survived Auschwitz. But we know from his words that what is needed is that grain, that mustard seed, right? That grain of dissent that's going to be the thing that is different, the thing that is not assonant but dissonant. That is the ingredient that is going to save us and allow us to live, right? Live our own lives and live in the world. So I think this is something that I really have come to understand more and more in the past decade plus of my life. I will, and I'm very indebted to my all the time I've spent in the Italian literary tradition in Italy, finding these this source of sources, I should say, of hybridity in all sorts of ways. I mean, Ovid is, of course, the Roman writer, right? Is the poet of all things hybrid. I come to India and I see signs of Ovid everywhere, right? Absolutely everywhere. Everywhere I'm walking, I'm going. It's one big container of everything has been kind of Ovidified, And I realized that it has always been this way, and maybe that's why the poem spoke to me for as powerfully as it did when I discovered it at university at the age of 20 or so, because I had already been exposed to this world. I'd already been exposed to India and what India is and has always meant to me, which is this extraordinary container of hybridity, mixture, combination, dissonance, languages, right? The key point being languages. We were looking at the photograph of Antonio Gramsci in your studio upstairs. He's another figure who, aside from, alongside his political visions and philosophy, his linguistic journey, which I've written about in Translating Myself and Others, really spoke to me deeply. As a Sardinian man, son who wrote letters from when he was writing his letters from prison, still writing letters in the Sardinian language to his mother, always fascinated with words, dialects. Then he marries a Russian woman. He writes to his children in Russian, in Cyrillic alphabet sometimes. I mean, incredibly moving. The whole story, the whole linguistic story, if you look at it carefully, of Gramsci is something I think that also is really very much in harmony with some of the things we're talking about this evening. And I'll just share, I wanted to say this in Kolkata. I was participating in the literary meet there last week, and it was held at the Alipur jail, which was a jail built by the British and imprisoned people like Nehru and Nazrul and others, and I was thinking a lot about Gramsci, who spent the vast majority of his life in prison, and he said in one of his letters, he said, when he was obsessed with learning languages, he would write for dictionaries, send me grammar books, send me dictionaries, send me German dictionaries, send me Latin dictionaries, and he, in one of the letters, he says, if I knew I were to be executed tomorrow, I would ask for a Chinese lesson. This is what I would want to do. Like people say, oh, I want to eat chocolate cake or whatever. He said, no, I want to learn a little bit more of a language I don't know. I mean, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life. The most powerful thing I've ever heard in my life, perhaps, is that line from Gramsci.
And that reminds me of the authors that soon after the Second World War, when modernity hit Western world, but maybe because, and I see a lot of similarities within this. That modernity comes with this will to conform to an ideal way of being, and in the process of doing that, it kills differences. And Pasolini was all his life writing about the relevance of dialects and protecting dialects. Dialects were almost banned back in the public school, because the Italian language had to be spread as a common thread. But he was fighting to say that can coexist with the dialect, and the dialect is a very important source of inspiration. And when a language is capable of embracing diversities, then it flourishes. And Calvino is another example in the way he incorporated dialect through fables. He was very fond of listening to stories. The one of the other horrible things that modernity brought along with it was the sense of the non-relevant culture. Farmers sadly are not relevant, and with farmers and with craftsmen, the entire literature, the entire network of stories, narrative that for centuries have been there. So what you're saying resonates a lot with that, and that makes me asking you, because I know that you're also very curious. You just said that you discovered that statement by visiting an exhibition of Salvo, and again, a couple of important statements you made in the past 2 days came out while visiting art exhibitions. How important is the role of visual art and cinema in your process of your way of being inspired, but in your process of being a human being, a writer?
Very much. I'm a very. I don't like this construction. I'm an X person. I don't. It's like it really bothers me. Everyone says I'm a paper person or a curtain person or whatever. It's such a strange formula. But anyway, I am a visual person. I will say that, which is to say, I have always been drawn to what things look like, struck by what things look like, have sort of tastes and desires based on how I want my space to look and things like that. But to tie it back to writing, writing is as much about language as it is about sound, about hearing, about listening. So many of my stories have grown out of the act of listening to other people talk to me, either talking to me or talking indirectly, talking around me, and seeing. And so writing is a combination of all of those things. And, to go back a moment to Ovid and this whole similar, not identical way of life. So one of the things you will discover if you read a poet like Ovid or Homer or almost any of the ancient Greco-Roman poets is the epic simile, the layered way that the ancient poets had of communicating something. So whether it's the fear on a young girl's face when being compared to the wind that's rippling on the surface of the water, right? This is Pyramus and Thisbe episode in Ovid, and she's afraid, and her face goes white, and Ovid compares it to this trembling, the surface of the sea trembling. So what does this mean? It means even Ovid, the poet, a poet of a level of genius we cannot even fathom, right? So it's like Ovid, Taj Mahal, like these things are like larger than life, right? We don't know how they even get made. So this poem is like that. So even he and the poets before him have to recognize, remember in the beginning of the conversation, I said this Italian word, the scarto, right? This lack of total connection, this distance, this gap between one thing and another. So even our greatest poets have to draw on the simile to explain what is fear, what is love, what is desire, what is death, what is dawn, what is night. What are all of these inexpressible emotions? Like so much of writing, we use language, but really what we're really trying to say is beyond the grasp of language. And we know this. Dante certainly knew this. right? The entire Commedia is full of Dante, the poet, saying, I actually cannot say this. I actually cannot say this to you. It is beyond language, right? And that is what every writer knows and every translator knows. But still, we aspire with the tools we have, the linguistic tools. So that's where the visual, the sonic, these things will enter in. I think that I've always been inspired by all art forms. I descend on one side of my family from artists. My maternal grandfather was a painter. My maternal uncle was also an artist and a photographer. One of my uncles played the charod, to the point where, Ali Akbar Khan wanted him as a student. And anyway, these are incredible things to have in family history. My mother wrote poems. So from her side of the family, I really received this sort of cultural, the passion for culture, for creativity. And I interpreted it in my own way, in a very far away place, in a very different language, in a very different context. And cinema, in particular, I think for both my Bengali education and my Italian education were kind of fundamental gateways, right? Certainly because I wasn't raised in it. I never lived in India. I never lived anywhere in India. So seeing, Bengali films, other films from, Indian films in general, gave me a sense of day-to-day life here and things and experiences that I would not have any access to otherwise. Similarly, I think, in the on-ramp to Italy, watching Italian films for me was a way to think about lots of aspects of Italian life and the language, of course. And then there was always a challenge of, maybe I can get to the point where I don't need to read the subtitles, and I like to watch foreign films in all languages for that reason, just to indulge with. I love what Gioia said about, basta with the mother tongue. Let's go straight to the other tongue and to the other languages and the other words. Because, I think, I don't know if you asked me this on stage or maybe backstage, Andrea, but, the importance of the other. What can the other tell us? Why is she important? Why must she be let in? Why must she be allowed to have a voice and have her eyes open and communicate to us? Is that, well, first of all, every artist is that person. Every artist is an outsider. That's kind of, everyone who is an artist knows that and has to embrace that, and I think, I was completely lost as a human being until I became a writer. And then I realized that sense of deep alienation I'd always felt, that sort of lonely place, that placelessness, that, where do I belong, and all these questions suddenly could be transformed in an Ovidian way into a source of ongoing generative exploration vis-a-vis writing. But I think any artist would say that's the moment, right, when the artist is born, when they realize that this outsider position that they feel, whether they're the children of immigrants, it's not relevant, the world is full of artists from all kinds of backgrounds, and what they can be born and raised in the same house and die in the same room they were born in, but they still have to adopt that position, and that perspective and that role of the outsider, which is why, so much of what is happening in today's world goes against the creative forces that our civilization has produced, right? So if we want to go against that, then we give in to this, keeping the outsider out and putting down the boundaries. right, and enforcing the boundaries. But I think writers, artists, translators, we are questioning the boundary all the time. Because the boundary is simply a construction. And one of the most amazing things about living inside of Ovid's hexameter for the past 5 years, in this crazy moment that we're living in the world, is that he lived long before the nation state. There was no such thing. There were the loosest of boundaries. Nobody even knew, right? They were just, and yes, there was the Roman Empire, of course. And Ovid actually says this sort of troubling thing at the end of the poem, which is the one thing I really take him to task for at the end of the poem. He says, well, now my poem is done, and my body is mortal, but I hope my words will live on, and blah, blah, blah. He says, and as long as anywhere where the Latin language is, I'm just paraphrasing, is spoken, I will, and the last word of the poem is vivam in Latin. It means I will live. So it's the last word of the poem is I will live because these words will live on wherever Latin is read and spoken. The one thing he didn't realize is that, of course, that was to end. That was to end because, of course, Ovid already knows that everything ends. Everything ends and becomes something else. But the reason Ovid, we're still sitting here talking about him, is because of translation. It's because he was translated into Italian, into Spanish, into English, into German, into all of these languages, and ongoing translation, because the translation of Ovid from William Golding is no longer the translation that we maybe need today, right? So that is so important. That was so important to me to be able to live inside of this moment. And I'm not saying, the Roman Empire had no problems. There were a series of issues we can discuss about the Roman Empire, but one thing it certainly didn't have was this construction of national identity based on language, based on and because Ovid too is always going toward the other. He's going towards Greece, which is where Gioia lives, by the way, and a country we both love passionately, and so that's already embedded in the poem, is his ongoing reaching toward the Greek tradition and language that is infusing his poem, and by means of these similes, and they're all visual, right? They're very visual, these similes that so they make you imagine. They make you imagine when Daphne's running from Apollo. They make you imagine the Gallic hound and the dog who's chasing the hare, and imagining this happening in a field, and sort of then imagining Apollo the god chasing this poor nymph. So the incredibly cinematic imagery in the poem.
Yes, while you were talking about that, the exhibitions that inaugurated the Prada Foundation 15 years ago was an exhibition created by Salvatore Settis, and I thought it was genius that Prada Foundation of Contemporary Art, began its path by asking an archaeologist of such relevance as Salvatore Settis to curate an exhibition on the relevance of copies. Copies not as identical, but as similar, more themes that works in art history the way translation works in the history of literature. And it was an amazing exhibition because it challenged the idea of authenticity, it challenged the idea of the unique piece, because then we discovered that Greek and Roman made multiple copies of one work, and that those copies were wonderful translations to travel with them. Two years ago in Berenice, they found a sculpture of Buddha in the temple of Isis, which was sculpted in a late Roman style in Alexandria with marble coming from Marmara, probably by artists who would be Roman, Egyptian. So all this it's a beautiful way of reawakening this way of seeing words from multiple perspectives, where translations are definitely necessary to build bridges to understand each other. But there's something that came to my mind when you talked about writing and the language. And it's to go back to the sound of the language you feel at home with. Because I was also very, very touched by the way your journey with Italian began. It began when you were young in Florence, by listening to people talking on the street, speaking on the street, and being completely fascinated by the sound of words. Is that we need the other's gaze on us to understand ourselves. And we understand better when the other sees things, sometimes even things we don't like, we don't want to be seen. We need the gaze of the other. And I would ask you how learning Italian has reinformed your writing in English, or vice versa, because a lot of Italian writers who are in your anthology writing in Italian, which is strained through the knowledge of English.
Yeah, I mean, well, this thing about being understood by the other, I think Calvino really did say it best, because he said that it was only reading his work in translation that he understood what he had said. This is pure Calvino, right? But I understand now, as someone who is self-translated and who has been translated, I do understand this sort of, it gives you kind of like a cold shower, you know? It's like a linguistic, you know, like the cold plunge. And you come out all kind of, oh my God, is that really me? So I think, and I agree that, you know, so many of the writers in my anthology, they were all part of a kind of a family of this kind of hybrid translator, writer, you know, interested to deeply obsessed with the other tongue, you know, including examples like Antonio Tabucchi, who wrote in Portuguese, you know, a very important novel. Requiem, you know, in which, you know, he writes a novel about his father and losing his father in a language that his father did not know, right? So like, let's think about the significance of that, right? You know, so many other, Grazia Deledda, another example from Sardinia, you know, who was, you know, before she won the Nobel Prize, everybody was sort of putting her into this category of, oh, she's, you know, she's la scrittrice sarda, and oh, she's got this kind of provincial thing, she's always writing about Sardinia, and then suddenly she wins the Nobel Prize, oh, she's our Italian Nobel Prize winner. So, you know, and she was very influenced by Russian literature, Deledda. I mean, I love her work. I love her. It's her centenary, I think, this coming year. So I'm excited to talk about her at Columbia, where I for half the year, the Italian Academy, we're going to celebrate her. But you know, I mean, I think this is the thing. Like, writers are formed by their experiences, their local circumstances, absolutely, but also by their reading, right? There's a parallel track. So writers have, like, you know, they have their parents, 1, 2, 3, I don't know, but they have some kind of familial, parental, you know, influence, body of influence where they're raised. But then they also have what the library or school or just the bookshop or whatever, like that is also becomes part of your family in some sense, right? Your literary family. And I think writers have to create their literary family. They're the people that they cohabitate with and keep going back to. And so like so many of the writers I've cited today, like Primo Levi, like Gramsci, like Deleuze, other writers, of course, from other traditions, other languages, Ovid, Tolstoy, whomever, like these become part of your family. And so I think for me, because my experience with Italian was so particularly significant, right? So I think the writing I'm doing now is inevitably has been, tinged by, first of all, my translation of Sternone. That was, another kind of fundamental, I think, immersion of translating those three novels, translating Domenico Sternone, who was, one of the finest, if not the finest living Italian writer, has a masterful control of the Italian language, one that I could never even dream of. I'm not even interested in that, right? Because it's just impossible for me to acquire that. It needs, his level of mastery and control of the Italian language is one that really does come from a lifetime of living and practicing the language as if it were an instrument, right? I have a different relationship to it, but but nevertheless, translating him allowed me into syntax, curves. It's like you get into the driver's seat with somebody, and they say you can actually turn the car this way, you can actually speed up here, you can actually skip over this, you can actually just drive over this grassy patch, and it's okay. And these are like the tricks that you learn when you translate, which is why I always tell people, oh, I want to be a writer, what do I do? And I say, translate something. Learn another language enough to translate it. Even if you're translating like a 4-line poem, you will learn more doing that than you will learn in a creative writing workshop, perhaps. I really believe in this strongly. So my own writing in Italian has evolved and evolved because of, not only because I've lived in Italy on and off for all of these years, but because of all of the reading, all of the thinking I've done in Italian, with other Italian authors. And also, the writing I'm doing now, even the Ovid translation, I think is, has been influenced by this whole process of engaging so rigorously with the other and understanding myself as an other all the time. I mean, I've never been anything but an other, so that's starting point, right?
Before ending with 2-3 questions from the audience, I would like to say that we are involved in the process of publishing an anthology, a small anthology of Italian writers who have been writing about India and they're never been translated into English. And we're talking about giants of 20th centuries like Manganelli, Pasolini, Moravia, and we're very tempted to call it the India of the other. And of course, we dream of an introduction, but I know that you wrote a text on Francesco Clemente's work. And Francesco Clemente is another other.
Yeah.
That spent most of his life commuting between Amalfi, Rome, New York, and Madras. When it was Madras, now it's Chennai, and how he managed to generate an incredibly inspirational, powerful, new painting, which is Italian, perfectly fits in tradition, but at the same time, it's Indian, it's other.
It's not authentic
It's not.
in the best way.
Would
Yeah.
you like to share with us a few words about that text that you wrote about Francesco Clemente?
Sure, yeah. So I had the pleasure of meeting Francesco recently in my life. I mean, he's lived in New York for years and years, and I've lived in New York for years and years, and our paths didn't cross until fairly recently through friends in New York. And so we met, and it was like we had been waiting to meet each other for years and years and years, right? So it was a very lovely encounter. And then the occasion, so we got to know each other a little bit, and then socially, and then I learned about the exhibit in Rome and the Palazzo delle Esposizioni, and so they asked me to write this piece, and so I just spent a really lovely afternoon visiting his studio in New York, which is like going to India, and so the piece is a little bit like that, you know, it's like what we can do creatively with space. How we can bring distance close, right? How we can play with this. So it was not only the way he had the space, kind of the atmosphere of the studio itself, but the work, right? Which, as Andrea says, is all incredible. His own hybrid Ovidian play of traditions superimposed and juxtaposed and on top of and alongside each other. It's incredibly rich work. And what I was saying, not into the microphone, is like it's totally not authentic, but of course it is absolutely purely authentic and original because Francesco made it, right? So I think the kind of authenticity I believe in is the kind that is forged by artists, right? If you can follow that. But that's I think where the authenticity, the word authenticity, we can still keep it in the dictionary when we can apply it to the original, unique, inimitable works of our great artists, right? But it was a really lovely experience, needless to say, and you know, I just think you mean even down to like the furniture he had these like big 4-poster beds, like high Indian beds that reminded me of like my relatives' houses in Kolkata, and where I would like spend months and months just like reading tattered Dickens novels and like boiling hot day, you know. And he had these things like spread throughout his studio, and so I felt very honored to spend that time with him and to enter into his world and to think about these questions that we've been talking about today, questions of belonging, moving, shifting, displacement, you know, what displacement, I mean, look, displacement, you know, I don't need to say to this audience, displacement can be, you know, a tragic thing in a person's life. You know, it can be something you never really recover from. And, you know, so we know this from history and from our stories, our family stories. But it can also be, and has been, you know, I mean, this is where that, you know, that power that human beings have of sort of forging ahead, forging new things, forging new ways of coping, and creating, right? And I, you know, in my own, you know, just my own modest set of experiences, I saw my mother and father forging a new life, and their story of displacement wasn't as terrible as some others, but it was hard. It was a difficult journey for them, and you know, my father chose to leave India. My mother didn't really. She just was along for the ride, you know, it wasn't an easy childhood because of that. But I saw the determination of both holding on fiercely to certain things, but also the letting go and understanding that new things had to be forged, and it was going to be similar but never identical.
Thank you. Gioia, now it's almost 2 years that this project of compiling an anthology of the India of the Others goes on. Few words about the complexities of working with publishers, heirs, rights.
Yes, it's my. I really like to work on other projects. I love to be a translator, but I really appreciate when I can work with other people because it is a very solitary work. So it's interesting to try and wear other clothes for some time. It's not something I would do all the time. I've been editing two anthology projects before, but this is probably the most complex because, of course, when you go like Italy and India, bureaucracy is not easy. The publishers. So the idea is to translate into, of course, I won't be the translator. I'm just coordinating to have these 3 masterpieces plus a contemporary one with this amazing writer called Antonio Franchini, who is also the best editor in Italy and one of the best writers we have. For the Indian public, we're not asking the publisher to sell us word rights or like something fancy. But it is huge, so we're like, hello guys, think about this because it never happened. Pasolini was translated in the 80s by a small publishing house, but is not available anymore. So we're trying to create this other project. It's not easy, but it's interesting to see the gaze of writers in the 60s. Moravi and Pasolini came together. Manganelli was this hilarious journalist that hated traveling and was always sent traveling, and he wrote amazing, beautiful reports from all over the world. I mean, the fun part was that he really didn't like it, but he did it beautifully. And so we're trying to see if this is possible, and it's been going on. Of course, it's not full time. I'm a full-time translator, but it's been interesting to, first of all, because I worked with like 22 publishers, so I know who I should get to, and then they send me to the heirs and the state, and so it's a long process of finding the right person because I know everyone. It's doable, and now finding a publisher here. So it's Siga Siga. It's comes out in Greek. I don't know Greek yet, but we're discussing with Jhumpa how Greek comes out sometimes in French because she's also studying French. And the whole thing of the gaze of the other is something that for everything we've been saying, I had like 10 questions. I knew I would never ask them because there's too much. But the whole idea of what is in their gaze in the 60s, why is it important for us? It is important because it's another other. And so I think it's a very important project, and it contains everything that we said tonight about, or also smashing cliches. Like one is authenticity. By the way, there was this fantastic article like 20 years ago by Vikram Chandra on the Boston Globe, which was called Against the Cult of Authenticity, and it's one of the most amazing pieces of writing exactly about this subject. The cult of the mother tongue, the idea of the sad life of the translator, the idea of the translator as a solitary person. I mean, these are all cliches that we have to smash. We have to start like the whole translator, the betrayer. So I think that all these projects, and this is one of like Andrea's Andrea was talking about shared histories, and all these projects have the same aim to take us towards the other. And one of these projects is this little anthology that we're trying to do. We don't know how it's going to happen, but the idea is really to show us other ways of seeing India, but also Italy. It gives us a perspective of what was the mentality in the 60s and how people were traveling, how people were, and special people, these were some of our best writers. So this is one of our projects.
I must say that Earth and Foundation and Trust were the owner of the rights of these books when they heard that there was the possibility of publishing media. They were generously accepting to give it for free, which is, and of course, and then the Ministry of Culture sustaining the project. Now, we have 5 minutes for questions from the public, and then we go to signing, book signing. Please, when we go for book signing, book, name, signature, period. No chatting, no stories, no pictures, because otherwise we'll spend the night here and we want to eat. Okay. Question? Yeah. What's the mic?
Namaste. I just want to say that you forged in the most authenticity your novel namesake. It was forged in the most authenticity. Your words were a source of comfort and warmth and belonging to many of my family members. I'm really happy to meet you. I would like to ask you, Gram, the same question which was asked to Gramsci. So let's say you are going to live your last day. What would be your next wish?
Well, that's a serious question.
Namaste. So I'm Sabri Chadola. I'm a well-known author myself. Also considered the #1 expert on metaverse. So I believe this is some kind of metaverse which you are trying to create. My question is, what is the emotional response from the reader that you see in terms of your projects, experiments, bachata, or these keywords which we heard? What is the emotional response from the reader side? Do you want it to be in awe, some kind of mystery you are trying to build from the reader's perspective, trying to create a new genre, trying to just flummox them? But from the reader's perspective, what kind of response do you see?
Thank you for your question. I don't seek anything from my reader other than the act of reading. And then they're 100% free to interpret, react to, respond to the book in whatever way they wish, whether they abandon it after 5 pages or read it 5 times. That's then the book then goes into their hands. It's no longer mine.
Andrea, I have a question regarding the process of creation in Italian. So when you write in your English writings, we see that you use various kinds of narrative techniques to reflect various themes of dispossession, displacement, alienation. When you write in Italian, how do you explore, how do you navigate between content and form in your narratives?
Thank you for your question. It seems quite technical. I don't know if I can answer it. I don't know if I distinguish between how I write in one language as opposed to another language in terms of narration. I mean, I think I'm really working with language, one language or another language. So I'm thinking in that language, and I'm trying to give form and shape in that language. I'm working on making the sentence have a certain energy and equilibrium. That's really what my writing is about. And then, all of the other stuff, it just sort of, it has to get done, but it's not different. I haven't found the experience of writing in Italian to alter the way that I handle those other elements you spoke of.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights. We've been talking a lot about the translation between languages. I also wanted to ask your opinion on the translation between mediums, because your book was was made into a movie, and we are smashing authenticity and the associated cliches. But I would love to understand, how do you stay true to the authorship of the writer once you're making it into a movie? Because everyone criticizes and always says that book is the best medium, which I agree. But what's your take on that when people make a movie out of the book? How do you stay true to the authorship? And how do you forge a bit of the authenticity? Thank you.
Thank you. Always an interesting question. Again, I think the true word gets us into trouble, because some cinematic or television adaptations are very quote unquote faithful. Some take more liberties, so this translation discourse is relevant. But I actually have to disagree with you. I don't think that the book is always superior to the cinematic. There have been cases where the film is actually much stronger, and sort of the story sort of lends itself to cinema more powerfully than in the form of the story or the novel. And a lot of Italian cinema comes out of novels that aren't read with the same passion anymore, but then the movies are kind of groundbreaking works of cinematic art. So it really depends on the artist and what they're doing. And so I can just say from personal experience, my dear friend Mira and I are Delhiite, also New Yorker, made a movie out of The Namesake, and it was just a really beautiful experience in which I realized that she really understood Salvo. She really made a movie that was similar, not identical, and she maintained certain elements, and she she went to Kolkata, she went to my parents' house. I mean, she really wanted to get the sense of the atmosphere of what it was like to be raised in a Bengali family in America. What was it like to go to, and yet she made it her own. And I wanted her to do that because it was her turn to be the artist, not mine. I had already written the book, and I was writing other things, and I was doing other things, and this was her moment to create something based on, inspired by my book. And we know that some interpretations can stray very far, and some can, there are those like 15-part PBS, masterpiece theater things I used to watch when I was growing up of like, here's like, the George Eliot novel in 17 episodes. But even those, the director has to take liberties. You cannot reproduce an 800-page novel in 25 episodes of 1 hour. It's literature, language is it's a completely different medium, right? It's a radically different medium. And you're also giving the reader so much more kind of imaginative power to visualize things, which, in film, you are giving the viewer, the actor, the interpreter, what they're wearing, what the sound of their voice is like, what their, how their eyes are sparkling or whatever, it's a more passive experience for that reason. Not that, I haven't watched certain films over and over again and read them at the way I read books, but it's a different language. But thank you for your question.
Hello, my name is Shelly. On behalf of Third Culture Kids everywhere, I think I'd like the first person. I would like to say thank you for having written the namesake and the freedom, I suppose, that came out in the namesake too, because I saw myself in Gogol, I saw myself in both the parents as well. And when the film came out, it brought together my family in a way which I think it hadn't before. And so that experience that was specific but yet was universal. So thank you for that. I also run a small community library up in Himachal Pradesh. And it's a place where, while Jhumpa, you were saying, the other and needing, being open to the other is very, very important. But there are still pockets where pride in the mother tongue is not there, and that is it's a reality that we live with. It's the result of the ecosystem that we're in. But I also use creative writing and especially poetry to talk about and take compassion into action. And my question to Jhumpa would be that for young people today, and living in the world with so much conflict, with so much contradiction, what would be your message to young people, especially in rural areas, where to take pride in where they come from, to take pride in whatever form of creativity there is. In a place where 30% of young people are unemployed, survival is an issue, livelihoods are an issue. But how do we prime for the luxury of time to create also in whatever form that might be? What would be your message?
Thank you so much for sharing your reflections. And you raise a lot of important questions about young people and navigating today's world. And I think, whether this applies to children being raised in rural communities or in big cities, I think there's been a sea change for our new generation of human beings with technology and everything that has happened in the world. And so, I think, I don't have, you asked me for a message, I don't have a synthetic message to give you. I don't really think that way. I meditate on things. They come out in my work. They sometimes I elaborate on something I've said before. I think the only thing I can say about, it seems to distill what you're talking about. It's sort of how to be true to, again, this question of one's origins, one's place, and then the wide world that's calling, and perhaps calling to us in a different language, perhaps in the English language, perhaps taking us far away from where we come from. This was also my father's story. This was also the story of my grandparents-in-law, right? This is the story that's been played out all over the world throughout history. The call of a better world, a better life, survival, and what to do with where we come from and where we're going. And so I think my only message would be that, you do what you have to do. You do what you can. It's not going to be, there's no perfect solution to any of this. You just, you try to be true to yourself and your own values and your own ethics and your own compass, and you recognize, I think there's a message for this entire evening. I think what we can be true to, what we can be authentic to, is the other within ourselves. It's not a binary. It's not us and the other. It's that we are the other. And this was the link, the thread that linked the Roman stories in my latest book. And I think this really distills perhaps, sort of the question that has come from the audience and what the ideas that we've tried to develop a little bit in this marvelous three-way dialogue. Thank you so much.
We would end it here, but to be just to this side of the audience that hasn't had any chance, the very last one. Sure.
Hello, Jhumpa. I am Farhan from Andrea Anastasio University, and my question to you was, in one of your interviews, you mentioned that you struggled with this question of American mythology, and you responded to that question that yes and no, that you've not felt fully American, and we have found that in reflecting in your work as well, in the namesake, you grapple with this question of first generation immigrants, and then forward to your next work in Unaccustomed. You have written about second generation immigrants, and now at this stage of your career, when you are a mother yourself, how do you grapple with this question of having changed geography from America to Italy, and now being a mother to children, two beautiful children of your own self? What kind of conversations you have with your children? Do they have similar question about identity and belonging, and how does it inform your writing at this stage of your career? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this is getting a little awkward because one of my beautiful children is sitting here. So I don't really want to speak too much on his behalf. And in fact, my two beautiful children have now become two beautiful adults. And, I think it's certainly been interesting to see how the question of identity is pertinent to us all. And, you could certainly ask him how he feels about the different pieces of his identity and his own relationship to it. And this is what I was saying to the previous questioner, is that, in the end, it's not a perfect thing. It can't be like, oh, this percent. I mean, even though, okay, technically, maybe the DNA, right, is saying, oh, well, I'm half this, I'm quarter this, I'm quarter this. It doesn't work that way because, it's the proportions shift depending on who we are in the moment, where we are in our lives, where we are physically, where we are emotionally, where we are psychologically, what is calling to us in one particular moment versus another particular moment. There are moments when we need to reject what we come from and who we are. And there are moments of, of drawing closer. And there's no way to predict how they're like winds, right? Ovid loves writing about wind currents. They're so unpredictable. It's an unpredictable thing, and you have to just sort of move through it and be aware of who you are. But really, thank you for your question. It's been the blessing of a lifetime to have my children, and we talk, and we're very close, and I love them very much. Thank you.
And on that, I can add that walking around Delhi and listening to you three speaking in Italian, it has been a marvel within many marvels. So, thank you, Jhumpa, for being with us tonight. It's been a great opportunity for us. I remind you that Jhumpa is going to be with us again on the 1st of February at 7 p.m. at the Stein Auditorium. We are going to screen Il Sorpasso, a film that she chose immediately when I asked her what would be your film, Italian film classic, and she immediately said, "Oh, definitely Il Sorpasso by Dino Risi." She will be attending the screening, and she'll be at the end of the screening talk about the film. And I thank the team of the Italian Cultural Center. It has been quite a challenge to move from 120 chairs to 250. So that required, metaphorically speaking, it meant a lot of organization. So I thank the team, and I thank Gioia for this beautiful journey we are into, that hopefully we see becoming real at the end of this year, and maybe next year finding ourselves here to present the anthology. So thank you very much, and I think the audience, I must say that you look at the stage, looking at you, the level of attention was quite amazing. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being here tonight.